I do have a trigger warning on this podcast episode. We are talking all about secondary fertility issues and in particular sleep for your family. So many times when you're on the fertility journey, you may have a little one and you're trying to focus on your sleep, which is key for reproductive health, but your little one may have other ideas. Maybe they're in the bed and somehow the co-sleeping, it just happened that way and you really want to transition them into their own bed. Maybe they're having a hard time falling asleep. Maybe they're getting up early in the morning and you're like not ready to wake up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. We're talking all about strategies to help with your little one to organize, to manage their sleep. So then you can then optimize your sleep. Let's go. Hey, Kim, excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. Me too. Excited to be here.
Great. So today we're talking all about how to help, sleep for your, typically we're dealing with secondary infertility. And I've talked to so many people, we're like, you've got to work on your sleep. Like sleep is key for your reproductive health. And then they're trying to work on their sleep, but we may have a little toddler or younger running around dealing with naps and tantrums and doesn't want to go to sleep in the bed, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, how do we focus on our sleep when our little one, and then there's guilt around that because we want to spend time with a little one but as we prepare for our newborn, as our baby, there's just a lot of like things mixed up in there. And obviously we're here on the podcast to really, we want people to focus on their preconception health. So I just really wanted to bring you on because I thought it was an interesting topic to help people dealing with secondary fertility issues and how they can they can look at that differently. So, well, let's just talk about what are some. First of all, how did you come to do this work? 20 years ago when you wrote your first book, how did you?
How did I become this sleep lady? So I'm a licensed family therapist for 31 years, and then I had my first child 29 years ago, or almost 29 years ago. And she, at that time, the only thing worldwide, not just the United States, was one book they had to go to the library for, of course. And it was by Dr. Richard Ferber. And it basically had a sleep training method. It was the first of its kind that said, put the baby in the crib, awake after a soothing routine and leave the room. And when they cry, you can go in and check on them in timed increments, giving, longer and longer amounts of time before you go in, with the idea that you'll sort of leave them and they'll eventually figure it out and learn how to put themselves to sleep. And I remember thinking, really, that's the only thing we have? And what if, A, that doesn't work? Because nothing works for every child, of course. And B, what is my child learning in terms of self-soothing from like a dysregulated state and no help or support or reassurance from a parent at a time when, really the first 18 months of life, such a focus is on creating a secure attachment with one and sometimes two primary caregivers. So I waited until my baby was older, and then I made up what's now called the Sleep Lady Shuffle. It's a gentler sleep training method where I don't even call it training, I like to call it coaching. Where you put the baby in after a soothing routine, and say you can do this with kids in beds too. It actually works better with kids in beds than leaving them to figure it out on their own. Because what kids in beds do, they just come right out of the room. So what I basically did was create this method where you stay offering physical and verbal reassurance for your child, doing less and less as you start to move away and they start to incorporate the skill independently. And got my kids sleeping through the night, my friends, my family's kids. And my sister-in-law was like, you got to add this to your therapy practice. And I was like, well, I'm pregnant with my second one. Let's see. Maybe I was lucky. Even though I'd had all these experiences with these other families, I wanted to be sure. I was still perfecting my trade, And I had her, unfortunately, 2 weeks early, horrible silent reflux, super alert personality, made me a better sleep lady and, frankly, a better mom, because I had to be on my toes with these personalities. If any of you are listening, you probably know if you have one of these alert kids. And once I got her sleeping well, then I thought, okay, that was hard. I'm on to something. And I did add it to my practice. And honestly, it just kind of blew up because I would create a gentle, customized plan with the family. We'd pick a start date, and then I would call them and coach them through the process over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, which was really the secret sauce, was that support and strategizing over time. And that's kind of how it all took off. They just, once you get a good night's sleep, your whole life changes, and you tell everybody. So not only does it help your reproductive system, as you said, Sarah, but it helps you feel like a better partner, a better parent, a better whatever your work is outside of the home. You just have glass half full instead of half empty when you have a good night's sleep.
Absolutely. I am like all about the routine. I remember when the kid, and this is as we talk about this, having older children now. I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I say don't ask someone for advice on this stuff. Obviously this is your work, but for someone like me, where I'm like, remember when the kid was 6 months old? I remember people saying, it'll go in 2-week increments. Those sort of routines. And interesting, you say takes 2 to 3 weeks to really get this rolling. Because remember, like 2 weeks, and be like, oh my goodness, and then they do something else, and you'd have to work through that. But so let's kind of talk about some of the unique sleep issues with a baby that would be like 5 to 12 months, like getting them on a sleep schedule. I was very much into the schedule. I had them kind of doing their own thing. But I just remember when they became a toddler, it was like we put the little baby gate out and it'd be like yelling, and they want drinks and they want food and they want to come down the thing and they want to kiss you and they want to tell you, they like up and down, up and down, up and down. Where the patients came in. And I remember at that point, I think it was the Baby Whisperer or something. I had some sort of book. The person was on Oprah. I'm reading the book going, what am I going to do? I need this kid to have a nap and all this sort of stuff. So it can be like super, when you're in the middle of this and you're trying to prepare for your second child or expand your family, and your little one is like running around and not sleeping, it can be super frustrating. And then you're also sleep deprived, which makes it even worse. So yeah, what are some kind of like sleep schedules for maybe a 5 to a 12-month-old, we'll be looking at?
So I'm going to say 6 months to 12, because the science says that the variability under 6 months is huge. In the beginning, in the first couple of months of life, from one baby to another can vary by a total of like 8 hours difference of sleep. So we really notice that the bell curve gets nice and fat after 6 months. So 6 months to a year, basically, they'll go from 3 naps to 2 naps. Usually, they'll start sleeping through the night and not need a feeding. There is a small percentage of babies that need a feeding until 9 months, and then not very much at all, unless, of course, there's health problems or there was prematurity or growth issues, anything like that, that would warrant needing feeding during the night. Most bedtimes in this age range is like 7:30 at night. Yeah. Those parents are shocked to find that out and are putting their kids to bed later, their babies to bed later, in hopes that they'll actually sleep better at night, which actually is not true, even though I think it's logical. Like, skip naps, go to bed later, and your kid will sleep better. It's actually the exact opposite, because just like you and I, we also have we have a circadian rhythm, just like our children do. Theirs don't start to become really formed, shall we say, until around 6 months of age. So when we miss those windows, those natural times, it makes it easier for us to go to sleep and stay asleep. Our body secretes alerting hormones. And then it's like trying to go to sleep with like two espressos right before bedtime, and you're only 10 months old, right? So it'll take them longer to go to sleep, cry more, wake up more during the night, and it's kind of this vicious cycle. So definitely early enough bedtime, and you want to, as I call it, fill the daytime sleep tank. So I'm going to give like ballpark average amount of day sleep for a 6 to 12 month old. It's about 3 hours total, and about 11 hours. Again, I'm giving you big because a lot happens. A 6 month old is very different than a 1 year old, but that's about how much sleep that they need. And they really need the sleep just as we do. While we're sleeping, we're working on memory retention, storage, and organization. Same for our kids. We're also working on our immune system largely at night. Same for our kids. And then our children are producing and secreting growth hormones at night so that they can grow at the incredible rate that they grow. So it really, sleep is everything, is what I say.
Yeah, I remember I definitely put my kids to bed really early. It was like, I remember it was like we start getting ready around the 6:37. Then it would be like, take them a little while, their bath and the whole entire routine, and then off to bed. And yeah, they because I was rigid with this routine, it did serve me well because I was not one, and we'll get into this a little bit, like the co-sleeping. I had to put myself first because I knew some of those things, they weren't going to work for me. I was going to be just a bear if I didn't get my sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And I know you mentioned toddlers and preschoolers. So I just want to say quickly, because even though we only went up to 12, there may be a listener who has, let's say an 18-month-old or 2 years. So between 15 and 18 months of age is when our toddlers will go from 2 naps to 1.
Yeah.
And they'll go to 1 afternoon nap. And it really should start before 12 noon. And still the 7:30 bedtime. There are quite a few daycares that make your 1-year-old switch to 1 nap before they're ready. It's kind of like a staffing and setup issue usually, but it really isn't a year. It's between 15 and 18 months. And so then they tend to keep that 1 afternoon nap. The average is 4 years of age. I've seen a good smattering of 3.5-year-olds drop their nap or go to a nap every other day, or as I say, every few days until their personality kind of tanks and they get super cranky. And then we know it's time for a nap day. And then they transition hopefully to quiet time.
And so do you have a time in the morning and a time in the afternoon that you sort of, so basically they should go to bed for the second one before noon? Is that what I heard?
For if the toddler is transitioning to 1 nap?
No. So like if they're doing the two naps still, like when should they go?
Oh yeah. Again, it depends, but on average, it might be something like 9-ish and 1-ish.
Okay. Yeah. And then to bed around the 7:30, like you said.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And let's just talk about that co-sleeping with I think there's safety issues around that too, but some of the positives and then the negative. I think it's like way more popular now, like 2023 for the co-sleeping than it was, when I had my kids, almost 20 more than 20 years ago. So what's your take on that and co-sleeping positives, negatives?
I'm not against it. As long as you're doing it safely, right? This is really the most important factor. And depending on, if you're in the United States or Canada, where most of our culture does not co-sleep. And so we often have mattresses with feather tops and we have quilts and all kinds of things. And we don't really have a safe sleep environment. And 60% of parents are co-sleeping at some point in the first year of their baby's life, right? Out of desperation, you're exhausted, you bring them in, you maybe don't mean to have them fall asleep while you're feeding them, but everybody does, because those natural hormone releases relaxes us. And so that's more reactive co-sleeping. The American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend bed sharing, is what they call it. But I think that if 60% of families are doing it at some point in the first year of life, I think it's important for us to know how to do it safely, since it's clearly happening. And I'd rather not like put my head in the sand, but instead, help families make, informed choices. So that usually means like, no feather top pillow. You could, put a mattress on the ground. If, let's say, you're not sure what you want to do, you have a crib in the room, you could always have like a twin mattress or a futon in that room as like a backup plan, because at least it's safe. It's, doesn't have all the, quilts and everything else in it. And I have some good resources in my new book and on my website. You can also look at John McKenna's work. He also has, illustrations of an example of a safe co-sleeping. I think it's important to, you have a plan, and maybe as an example, it didn't work out, or you didn't want to co-sleep with your first child, but you want to with your second one. Just know that, you set up that safe environment, and just know that it's okay if you change your mind, or you can't get a wink of sleep because every little squeak of the baby, because they squeak a lot during sleep, wakes you up, or it's disruptive to your partner. It's okay to transition out. I've also had, and I know that, sort of family bed people would disagree, but I have found that there's certain temperament kids that they just don't like it. It's too much sensory input, noises and smells and textures, and they just need like their own quiet, dimly lit space. And so then we have to transition them out. So I'm not like a hard and fast, never co-sleep. I always say, if you're going to do it safely. If you're doing it because you were desperate and now you don't know how to get out of it, well, then that's where, sleep coaching comes in, which is, really super common, by the way. If anyone's listening out there and you're like, I don't like anyone to know that my 2-year-old sleeps in our bed with us, or still has a bottle, like, I promise you, you're not alone, even if you think you are. It's really common. So it's
or older, right? Where people are like, oh, yeah. They're like, why is the 8-year-old still in the bed? No, yeah. I had a thing where like, I didn't want to have that happen. So I never, like, I would like, if you guys want to come in the room, we got a little spot down here on the floor for you. We'll bring in your pillow and your blanket. It sounds mean, but I'm like, I didn't want to have it that like, it's all snuggly in here. And then they would never leave. And I'm like, then they weren't happy in their own room. Like, their own room should be their, like, I always looked at it, it was like their sanctuary, and they should be happy in their own room. So how do we, so here we are, we didn't really want the co-sleeping. They're here. How do we gradually get them back to their little spot where we want them to be? Unless, obviously if we like co-sleeping, we continue on with that. But
I'll tell you the most popular scenario, or one of the most common scenarios that I'm sure somebody listening to this can relate to, is that you had a toddler who maybe you rocked or fed them to sleep, right? So I call that a sleep crutch. And so they haven't learned the skill of putting themselves, because that's what this all comes down to, is, does your child know the skill of putting themselves to sleep independently? Meaning that you don't have to do anything to them or for them to get them to sleep and back to sleep. So common ones are breastfeeding, bottle feeding, rocking to sleep when they're babies. And then as they get toddlers, maybe you've weaned them, but you're rocking them, or you're still giving them a bottle, and then the bottle's not enough. So now you then rock them or bounce them, and then you're putting them into their crib of sleep, and having to do the same thing in the middle of the night. And eventually, because our kids luckily, but sometimes not, it doesn't feel lucky, are only getting smarter, and they start to figure this out, and they start to wake up sooner, or even sometimes the minute their bottom touches the mattress in their crib, and then crying and the whole thing. And so then either a parent will leave the room, or the toddler climbs out of the crib, or whatever else ensues. And at some point a parent will say, oh my gosh, either, oh my gosh, he climbed out of the crib, this is dangerous, we need to get rid of it and put him into bed, he's ready for a bed. Or I hear often, he hates his crib, he thinks it's like a jail. And I always remind them, toddlers don't know what jails are. And he may not have a positive association with his crib. That's true. And he didn't know how to put himself to sleep because you were rocking him and feeding him to sleep. And now you left. And of course he freaked out, right? And out of desperation, figure out how to jump out. And so then they get the toddler bed or whatever, a twin mattress. And then the parent starts lying down with the child to get them to go to sleep and stay asleep. And then, of course, we're all tired from a long day too. And then we start falling asleep. And so parents will tell me like, oh, I wake up, it's like midnight. I have to go back. I haven't even cleaned up the kitchen and gotten ready for work. And I just go ahead and go to my bed. And sometimes it even progresses to, I just sleep the whole night there. And then months to years can go by like that, where at some point, one of the parents says, I've had it. Either, hey, I miss you. When are you ever going to come sleep in bed with me? Or you're getting kicked by your toddler or whatever it is. So that's the most typical scenario of how that ends up happening. And so as you can imagine too, if you fall asleep with your child and then in the middle of the night leave, well, of course, they're going to wake up and say, where are you? And come into your room and want to get into your bed or have you go back into their bed. So so how we address that is with sleep coaching. Do you want me to explain a little?
Yeah, let's talk about how we do that, because it comes. I have many friends that did that. Oh, I call them. This was years ago, because obviously my friends' kids are younger. They're like, where are you? Let's chat. Oh no, so and so is just lying down with the baby. 3 hours later, they call me. I'm like, well, what the heck happened? Mine went to bed at 7. I'm like having my party time now, and it's me time because I organized that because I knew I needed that. But it can happen so easily. So many of my friends
Totally
it happened to them.
Yeah.
Right?
And I always tell parents, like, look, I promise you, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And we don't mean to find ourselves in these positions.
No.
We were just doing the best we could at the time, with what we had and what we knew. So, maybe we could use an example of a 3-year-old. By the way, the earliest age I recommend transitioning to a bed is 2.5.
Okay.
Because that is the average age that a child can cognitively understand, stay in your bed all night long and have just a little bit or enough impulse control to help them to not just pop out and run out of their room. So before that, it's super challenging. Is it impossible? No, but it's hard. So I always encourage parents to not move out of the crib sooner than 2.5 if you possibly can.
I'm just going to interrupt for just for 1 minute. I remember when we transitioned my daughter, and I think she might have been 2. And my friend, she was because our kids were the same age. She was transitioning at the same time. She's like, "Oh, I put her to her big girl bed. She stayed there the whole entire night. She read books by herself, and she had a wonderful time." I said, "Well, mine ran around the whole entire room, trashed the room, threw all her little books all over the place, jumping up and down, partying, at the gate, Mommy, like all this sort of stuff." I was like, what the heck is going? And to this day, the 21-year-old she is the kind of the life of the party kind of person. And so she just wanted to, she thought this was great. She's having fun, but there wasn't a lot of sleep going on. It was like, what are we going to do?
Yeah. It's just harder. And especially when they're, really bright and alert, I mean, they have FOMO, right? It's like there's a party out in the living room. You can hear it. For sure. So let's just say by the way, that your friend who was like a piece of cake from the very first night on it too, slightly unusual, but I'm going to guess that child already knew how to put herself to sleep independently before they transitioned her to a bed.
Mhm.
And that's why that went smoother. It's when we try to transition them when they're very young and they don't already have the skill, that they don't understand what you're asking them to do,
Mhm.
in terms of stay in your room, stay in your bed. So I've often had families get the crib back out, even if we can and need to. So let's assume it's like a 3-year-old, just to make the numbers easy and to make it more realistic. And you've been lying down with them again. They may have like had a bad dream or had a long ear infection or a bad cough for a week, and you just never kind of got out of that pattern of laying down with them. Again, we're no judging here. We're all doing the best we can. But now you're like, I've had it, right? I've now been laying down and co-sleeping at some point or all of the night, for 6 months. And so then what I usually have you do is have a family meeting. All of this I do have outlined in Good Night, Sleep Tight. So you can check that out, your library or on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And you have a family meeting, and I always say, blame everything on me. The sleep lady told me that we were supposed to teach you how to put yourself to sleep without lying down with you when you were much younger. So you're basically saying, I know that I was doing that thing, and now we're not going to do that anymore. So I don't want you falling on your sword, but I want you to acknowledge that, yeah, I have been laying down with you, I'm now not going to anymore. And so then you say, but mommy or daddy, let's say, is going to stay with you while you learn how to put yourself to sleep. Because again, they only learn what we teach them. And so now we're going to say, all right, we're going to teach you how to do it. And then I usually have the parent point out like some older cousin or favorite older neighbor kid who hopefully sleeps in their own bed and through the night. And you say, oh, and you're going to learn how to go to sleep and sleep in your bed all night long, just like cousin Joey. And you're really going to feel good about yourself. And you explain where mommy's going to sleep, or parents are going to sleep. And then I like to use a sleep banner chart. This is not to be confused with a sticker chart. This is not a reward chart. This is literally a chart. I call them sleep manners. That is kind of reiterating what is the behavior you want to see more of. So, it's like days of the week along the top, and this manners along the short side, like in a landscape profile. And then, could be cooperates at bedtime, put self to sleep without mommy laying down with you, put self back to sleep in the middle of the night without mommy laying down with you. And I also like a toddler clock, stays in bed quietly until your wake up light comes on. And then you use this like combination of approaches. So you go over your sleep manners every night and every morning. And then you start always in the sleep lady shuffle. You start next to their bed, sitting up. So no more laying down. I have all kinds of rules about what you're allowed to do while you're sitting up. And then 3 nights later, you're going to be sitting by the door in the room, and then the hall in view, and then out of view. Sometimes, to your point, when you're hall in view, you have to get a gate.
Yeah.
But I very much engage the child in that process. And I'll say something like, the sleep lady said, I have the parents say this, obviously, the sleep lady said that your body is so used to waking up and just popping out of bed and running to mommy and daddy's room and forgetting all about its sleep manners, that we're going to put up this gate so that when you wake up and your body pops out of bed and you get to the gate, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to stay in my bed. And then I always say to the parent, I know they're not really going to think that. But this is how you're going to say it. And then you're going to say, and when your body remembers its sleep manners and that it's supposed to stay in bed all night long, then we won't need the gate anymore. So it really becomes about the child being able to have, a say over the gate. It's not like a locking them in. It's a helping you remember. And when you remember, we won't need it anymore. And it really actually works beautifully. I see very few power struggles. I'm not saying we don't see tears because, if you have kind of taught your child that the way we go to sleep is mommy, parent, whatever, lays down with you, rubs your back, whatever it is, and you decide you've had enough, and they're 3, they're going to cry and have words for you. When they're babies, they just cry because they're like, what's going on? Why are you changing? This is not how we do this in this family. And so I always tell parents with older kids, I don't want you to start until you're 200% in. Like, both parents have to be united, be ready to make this a family priority for a few weeks, and know that often behavior gets worse before it gets better. It's kind of like they're testing you.
So those 2 weeks, and we're kind of gradually making our way out the door, down the hall, and then out of sight. And then, so over the 2 weeks, we kind of migrate, I would say, back to our room. And then, what do you see kind of getting worse? Like, I know mine, we running out asking for all sorts of things.
I think sometimes I usually expect the getting worse to be, if it's not the second or third night, then it's sometimes can be when you move to the hall and view. It's almost like your child's like, all right, I'll put up with this change as long as you're sitting in the room with me.
Yeah.
And then, what do you mean now you're out in the hallway? Sometimes I've seen those are the two markers, so to speak. But as long as, you stay calm and, caring, but clear and consistent in your expectations, they eventually say, okay, I don't I remember one little, I think he might've been 3.5. And we were, he was cooperative, shall we say, the first couple of nights. But then when he saw that this was going to be the new norm, he didn't like it. And he's like, so you're never going to sleep with me anymore? And the parent said, no, sweetie, I don't know, I can't remember if it was dad or mom, daddy's going to sleep in his bed with mommy. And the sleep lady, told us whatever. And he was like, well, I don't like the sleep lady. Why do you listen to the sleep lady? She's not your mother. I'm like, well, she's got a point.
And so what about, what was I going to say there and then when you're moving out, if they're like, hey, mommy, or dad, where, I did hide my husband do a lot of this stuff because I'm like, he's a little more patient than I am. So I'll be like, daddy. And do you answer? Or do you, if they're looking, if there you are in the hall and they're like, where'd you go? Are you supposed to say anything? Because I remember before.
Well, first of all, by the time you get to the hall, a lot's happened before then, right? You've sort of been setting the stage and the rules. So when you're sitting next to the bed, I have rules like you can pat, touch, shush, sing, but you have to do it intermittently, nothing constant. You don't get into a struggle about lying down. If they want to sit up and stare at you to try to keep themselves awake, and then I would just, close my eyes, put my hand in my lap and just be like, shh, 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 that kind of thing. Another rule I have is you control the touch. You don't want them holding your hand to sleep. Or I've had some kids put your hand under my back, of course, because then when you leave, they'll feel it and wake up. So I always say, no, you control the touch. So you can be like, no, mommy, we'll pat your hand for a little bit, and then it's quiet time. And then the third one is if they get really hysterical, which I don't find they get hysterical the first 3 nights. It's when you start to move away that sometimes they can. Then you can, give them a hug, say it's okay, lie down. Sometimes I've had to do a thing where it's like, mommy will sit here quietly and stay with you until you go to sleep, but you have to, lie quietly in your bed. and no yelling and jumping around. Or if they're partying, like you said, your daughter was, the life of the party, then sometimes I've had parents say, you know what, I'm going to leave the room. I'm going to go to the bathroom or, put some laundry away. And when you're ready to quiet down and lie down in your bed, I'll come back and sit with you. But I'm going to close the door, that kind of thing. So basically you're saying, I'm willing to do my part, but you got to do your part too.
Yeah, the sleep manners. I like that.
Yeah.
And what about the waking up too early? I remember I had a friend who we'd go camping and she'd be out with the kids at 5 a.m, taking them to the playground. It's time. I'm up. Let's go. And I'd be like, what's going on? But I do remember ours still it'd be like 6 or 6:30, on the weekend or something like that. It was really early. So how do you have that little clock in there? How do you get them to,
so what's helpful with I call it early rising, anything before 6 a.m. where they're up and like, woohoo, we're going to start the day. And the parent starts the day, not necessarily willingly or happily, but doesn't know what else to do. I call that early rising. So usually it's not a morning bird. There's a difference between, my kid wakes up at 6 a.m., happy, rested. Actually, I'm kind of a morning person too. Like that's not a problem. That's like a chronotype, right? For their sleep type. And so I usually have the morning bird parent be in charge of mornings with that morning bird child, because usually one of the parents is, when you see there is a genetic component. But the causes of early rising are helpful to look at. Number one is too late of a bedtime, which isn't exactly logical, but true, because again, you miss that window. Harder to go to sleep, takes longer to go to sleep, and it will create more awakenings during the night and early rising. I have to talk parents really into that one, because for you and I, it's not true, but for our kids under 7 years of age, it almost always is. Are there exceptions to every rule? Of course there are. But in general, too late of a bedtime, nap deprivation, like not enough day sleep. So then they're overtired when they hit bedtime, and too big of a wakeful window between afternoon nap and bedtime. Usually it's depending on the age of the child, 4 to 6 hours, but little guys, 3 to 4. And then the other one is, you can have also underlying medical conditions. Sleep apnea can cause early rising, usually caused by enlarged tonsils and adenoids with our children. Restless leg syndrome is also on the rise with children. They can even have it in their arms and other parts of their body, not just their legs. And then the last one that is sort of not very obvious is that they go to bed too drowsy. So the easiest time to put yourself to sleep is bedtime. Same for you and I. I always like to give the example of, if I, wake up at 5 and I'm awake too long, enough for my brain to start thinking about the 7,000 things I have to do, it's next to impossible to go back to sleep. Am I tired later in the day? You bet I am. And the same happens for our children. So if they don't have it mastered, i.e. you're rocking, feeding, laying down with them, so they're either fully asleep or pretty darn close to it at bedtime, then imagine as you have less sleep pressure and you're more rested, but maybe not enough, it's really hard to go back to sleep at 5 a.m. So whenever I have a parent say, by whatever age child's, waking up 4 or 5, it's just killing us, we're exhausted. I usually let's go through some of these questions, and you don't need all of them. You usually just need one of them to apply. And then at least you'll know, therefore, what to do, whether it's move the bedtime earlier or adjust the naps or go to your pediatrician or ENT or, that. And also don't forget responding consistently. If you let your child start the day or come into your bed at 5 a.m. and go back to sleep, then they don't understand the difference between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. So yeah, that's why another reason why I like to use a wake up clock. You could be like, well, the clock's not up green, so it's not time to get up.
Oh, the color ones they have, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have to teach them how to tell time anymore.
Yeah, we're like, you stay there till 10 o'clock. No,
Right. Yeah. Right.
like
Exactly.
8 o'clock. Oh, come on. And what about like the tantrums and stuff like that? So, like, I know when I used to pick the kids up when they were in daycare and stuff like that, I'd come in, they were like, well, my daughter still has blood sugar issues that she was dealing with. She'd be lying on the writhing around the floor, hungry, 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 hungry. I'd be like, trying to make your dinner, all that sort of stuff. And she was tired. She was exhausted because she was like, she still is like this high energy. We got just like go. We're gonna eat a lot. We're gonna like just all that kind of stuff, and then would crash out, and then the tantrum and sort of stuff. So tantrums earlier on. Then what's your take around tantrums and sleep, and what are you seeing there?
Well, for sure, when we're all tired, including us adults, I mean, I've had moments where I feel like I would like to be able to have a tantrum, myself, right? Like, even though we control ourselves as adults, or try to. But for sure, sleep deprivation is a big one. And you pointed out a really good one, which is, low blood sugar. And sometimes just sheer overstimulation that can happen at school and daycare, where sometimes the best thing, other than the situation you just said with your daughter, that maybe you did need to like give her immediately a snack, or maybe a snack in the car to prevent that low blood sugar meltdown when you got home. But let's assume it's not that. I usually, first thing I'm going to do is, when's the last time they ate, to your daughter's point example, and how long have they been awake? What time is it? And or do they just need like a concentrated 20 minutes of connection and transition? Some kids have a hard time transitioning from one thing to another. And some kids really need more like a touch, like their cup for touch is bigger. And they just need you to just get on the floor and have some quiet activity for 15 minutes can really transform a child. Same for if you can't do it then, but then add it into bedtime. I'm a big proponent of picture books, reading picture books. Notice how I said picture books, because the research shows that it's books, not chapter books, but picture books that help with imagination and storytelling and reading, and it's just incredible for brain development and honestly connection time. Some of my most precious memories, and my daughters say the same thing, are these incredible picture books that we read well into the years when they could read themselves. I mean, like, obviously really good stories, and not like good nights little, or good night moon.
Good night moon. Good night spoon.
Right. Yeah. So having that kind of connection time, and in tantrum, excuse me, temper tantrums in general, I tend to like using what's called hug hold instead of timeout. Where like if your child, like my younger alert one, would just fling herself on the ground and bang her head. I was like, why in the world would you do that? That looks like it hurts. And my older daughter never did anything like that. And so I would wait and I know that like the standard advice is walk away. Like, I just didn't find that worked with her. And I wasn't really sure what she was learning by that. And it wasn't because I necessarily like, didn't give her something she wanted. Who knows what it could have been her, but let's just say this is the example I like to give with parents, that she asked for a cookie before dinner. And I said, no, honey, we don't have cookies before dinner. And she flung herself on the ground, kicking and screaming. And I would say there's usually a moment, there's like a lull in the temper tantrum, so that you could pick them up facing away from you. And you wouldn't get hurt. You wouldn't be like kicked and, that kind of thing. And you bring them into a quiet place. I went into we had this stairway area that was very quiet and more enclosed. And I would sit her on my lap, and I'd put my arms around her like this, like they call it like a horrible name, passive restraint, but it's calming, right? Kind of like swaddle,
Yeah.
right? Or the thunder t-shirts for our dogs, right? And I would hold her like this, and you rock forward and backwards. And then you, parent, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. So of course now it's calming you also, which is helpful. And you do that until they literally feel their body release. Because they're starting to do that. And the only thing you're really saying is like, it's okay. Like, that's it. We're not having any conversation. And then once they're calm, you get down. If they're under 2.5 or not very verbal, I would just move on to a different distraction. If they are older and have words and a pretty good conversation, then I would say either then or whatever, 10 minutes later, I know you were upset when mommy said that we don't have cookies before dinner. We know that that's a rule. I wonder what else you could do when you get upset when you can't have a cookie before dinner. Could you stamp your feet or scream in a pillow or, whatever it is, and you help. And that way you're starting to help them. How do I handle big feelings and in this case, when you said no and I didn't get what I want? And so that's kind of a little bit about how I've handled that, even with my own kids and then my clients,
I love that. I love that. Okay, so so you've got a sleep guide here for newborns that we'll put in the show notes. So sleeplady.com/newborns sleep
Whoops. Yeah,
planner.
that's this newest book.
Newest book, The
Came out
Gentle
in
Newborn
March
Sleep Guide.
for
Great.
0 to 5-month-olds. And then I have this book that's been out for 19 years, is on its 3rd edition, The Sleep Lady's Good Night, Sleep Tight. This is for 6 months to 6 years old. Again, it's my gentle approach. I also have tons of free guides on my website on sleeplady.com. There's a tab on the top that says guides and books. And I have one on naps, on transitioning from crib to bed, on where to get started with sleep coaching. I have a newborn digital planner, and then I have one on how to help your children stay in bed all night long.
Great. And so any final thoughts for us, Kim, on our talk today for someone that's on the fertility journey, looking to expand their family? Anything you kind of words of wisdom or anything you want to say on the sleep part?
I think that I'm with you, Sarah, on making sleep a priority for yourself and for your children and your family, because sleep is everything, and it doesn't have to be cry it out or suffer. There are gentle approaches.
I love that. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.